It was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. Guests at the Miller wedding had gone home, full of champagne and gossip, leaving the hotel suite glowing with soft lamplight. The bed neatly turned down, rose petals scattered in clumsy handfuls across white sheets. Hours later, paramedics were dragging Daniel Miller's lifeless body from under the weight of his brand-new wife. Reporters would call it a freak accident, a tragedy nobody could have predicted. But for the people who knew Clarissa James, the 400-pound bride, it was the end of a story that had been building her entire life. Clarissa grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, in a small, peeling house on the edge of a neighborhood that never let her forget who she was. From the time she was 10, she was heavy, far heavier than the other girls. By high school, she weighed nearly 300 pounds. By 30, she had passed 400. Her mother tried to soothe her with church hymns and homemade pies, but even family couldn't quiet the shame. At Sunday service, Clarissa sat in the back row, feeling the benches creak beneath her, silently praying for the kind of love that seemed designed only for smaller women. The cheerleaders, the slim brides who posed in glossy magazines with radiant grooms. Clarissa wanted to believe she could have that too. Yet most of her romances ended before they began. Men chased her for a dare, or for fetish, or out of cruel curiosity. Few stayed long enough to meet her eyes. So when Daniel Miller walked into her life, Clarissa believed her prayers had been answered. Daniel was 35, a mechanic from Memphis with broad shoulders and a boyish grin. They met on a dating app, one of those chance swipes that felt like fate. At first, Daniel didn't mention her size. He laughed at her jokes, took her to barbecue joints and movie theaters, even held her hand in public. Clarissa felt something crack open inside her, something she thought had been sealed forever. She was seen. She was chosen. But Daniel had his own shadows. To his friends, he was charming, a man who could fix an engine and tell a dirty joke in the same breath. To Clarissa, he was attentive, almost too attentive, complimenting her eyes, her cooking, but never her body. He never once said she was beautiful, not outright. Sometimes she caught a flicker in his face when she leaned across the table or struggled to rise from a booth, a tightening of the jaw, a glance he thought she didn't notice. Clarissa tucked those moments away, refusing to let them poison the one good thing she'd found. Their relationship sped forward. Within months, Daniel was on one knee in the middle of a crowded restaurant, holding a ring box aloft while patrons clapped and Clarissa cried. Friends were stunned. Some whispered he was rushing into it for money or for some private bet. Others said Clarissa must have finally trapped someone into loving her. But Clarissa didn't care. For the first time, she had a dress to fit into, invitations to send, a man who called her mine. The wedding itself was modest but joyful. Clarissa walked down the aisle in lace that stretched tight across her frame, a bouquet trembling in her hands. She heard the gasps, the murmured jokes from the back pews, but she fixed her eyes on Daniel. His smile steadied her, even if it was more nervous than proud. In photographs, they looked like any other couple, two people beginning a life together, radiant in the glow of vows and promises. And yet beneath the satin and the smiles, there was tension. Clarissa felt it in the way Daniel's best man clapped him on the shoulder and whispered something that made him smirk. She felt it when a cousin remarked that she'd better not crush him on the honeymoon. Laughter rippled around the reception hall, and though Clarissa forced a smile, the words sank deep. That night, when the last guest had stumbled home and the music faded, the hotel suite became a stage for a final, tragic act. Hours later, when Clarissa dialed 911 in a panic, sobbing that her husband wasn't breathing, it seemed like the cruelest twist of fate imaginable. But if you asked the people who'd been watching from the sidelines, family, friends, neighbors, they would tell you they weren't surprised at all. To them, the marriage had been a powder keg waiting for a spark. Clarissa hadn't planned on falling in love, not really. By 32, she had learned to keep her expectations low. A few text messages that fizzled out, a man who wanted photos but never showed up in person, the humiliating discovery that someone had dared a buddy to date the big girl. Online dating was a minefield, and Clarissa stepped through it with caution. But then, one ordinary Tuesday evening, a new profile appeared on her screen. Daniel, 35, Memphis, loves cars, barbecue, and good company. He wasn't movie star handsome, but his broad shoulders and easy grin caught her attention. More than that, his opening message wasn't about her weight. He didn't ask for special pictures or make crude remarks. Instead, he wrote, "I've never been to Jackson before. Where's the best place for ribs?" It was the first time in years someone treated her like a person before a body. Clarissa typed back, her hands trembling, "You'd better come hungry." Their first date was at a small barbecue joint on the edge of town, the kind of place where grease stained the menus and laughter bounced off the walls. Clarissa almost didn't show. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, convinced he'd take one look at her and bolt. But when she finally walked in, Daniel stood up from the booth, smiling wide. He didn't flinch. He didn't glance around to see if anyone was watching. He pulled out her chair like a gentleman, and for the first time in a long time, Clarissa felt normal. Over pulled pork and sweet tea, they talked for hours. Daniel asked about her job at the call center, about her favorite movies, about the way she used to sing in the church choir. He laughed at her jokes, his eyes crinkling in a way that seemed genuine. Clarissa found herself laughing too, loud and unguarded. For once, she wasn't apologizing for taking up space. When the check came, Daniel insisted on paying, waving off her protests with a wink. By their third date, Clarissa started to believe. He drove her out to a drive-in movie theater, a place she'd always avoided out of fear of being seen. Sitting in his truck bed, wrapped in a blanket, Daniel leaned close and whispered, "You're easy to be around. No games." Clarissa's heart pounded so hard she thought he must hear it. No man had ever said anything like that to her. But there were cracks, subtle ones. At a diner one night, Clarissa noticed Daniel's smile tighten when she ordered a slice of pie. Another time, at the mall, he kept his hand in his pocket instead of holding hers when a group of teenagers snickered as they passed. He never made cruel comments to her face, but sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of embarrassment, of calculation. Still, Clarissa buried those doubts. After years of loneliness, after a lifetime of ridicule, Daniel was the first man who showed up, the first man who stayed past 3 dates. When he kissed her for the first time, awkward, sweet, his hand on her cheek, Clarissa closed her eyes and let herself believe she was just another woman in love, not a punchline. The relationship moved fast. Within 6 months, Daniel was spending most nights at her apartment. He left his toothbrush on the sink, his boots by the door. Clarissa beamed when neighbors noticed. For once, she wasn't the woman everyone pitied. She was engaged, glowing, chosen. Daniel's proposal came even faster. One humid summer evening, in the middle of a crowded restaurant, Daniel dropped to one knee. The ring sparkled under fluorescent lights as people around them cheered. Clarissa's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said yes before he even finished asking. The room erupted, strangers clapping, waitresses snapping pictures. But later, as they drove home, Clarissa caught something in his expression, nerves, maybe even regret. She brushed it aside, clutching the ring as if it were a talisman. To her, it was proof that her story had changed. No longer the lonely girl in the back pew, no longer the butt of jokes. She was about to become a bride. Friends were shocked. Some muttered behind her back, "Too fast. He doesn't mean it." Her own cousin whispered, "You sure he's not in it for something else?" But Clarissa drowned out the noise. For the first time, someone wanted her. What she didn't see, what she couldn't allow herself to see, was the shadow behind Daniel's smile. To him, marriage was a way to stabilize, to have someone cook, clean, and adore him without question. Clarissa gave him those things, and he knew it. But buried beneath the surface was something sharper, something crueler. And as the wedding day drew closer, that hidden edge would cut deeper than Clarissa could ever imagine. The morning of the wedding broke with the sticky warmth of late summer. The Jackson sky was clear, sunlight bouncing off the white tent pitched behind the small country chapel. Guests fanned themselves with folded programs, murmuring under their breath as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Clarissa sat in a back room of the church, squeezed into a lace gown that had taken weeks of alterations to fit. Her cheeks glistened with sweat, her curls pinned tight under a veil. She was radiant, nervous, and determined not to let anyone see her shaking hands. When the organ struck its first notes, the whispers began. Some were admiring, "She looks beautiful." Others were cruel, half-smothered laughter, someone muttering about a whole lot of bride. Clarissa heard them, even through the music. Her stomach twisted, but she kept her eyes forward. At the end of the aisle, Daniel waited in his dark suit, handsome enough to grace the cover of a small-town magazine. He smiled, thin, rehearsed, but it steadied her. She moved slowly down the aisle, the pews creaking under the weight of guests craning for a better look. The vows were standard, the kiss short and awkward, but the applause that followed felt genuine. For a moment, Clarissa believed this was real, that she was stepping into the life she'd always dreamed of. Cameras flashed, cousins cheered, and she clung to Daniel's arm like a lifeline. The reception told a different story. In the rented hall, paper lanterns swayed above tables piled high with food. The DJ spun Motown classics while children danced in a circle. Clarissa tried to soak in the joy, but everywhere she turned, she caught smirks, sideways glances, or jokes whispered a little too loudly. One of Daniel's old college friends clinked his glass and shouted across the table, "Hope the honeymoon suites got reinforced springs." Laughter erupted. Daniel chuckled nervously, raising his glass as if to play along. Clarissa froze. She forced her lips into a smile, but her chest burned. Later, on the dance floor, Daniel leaned close and whispered something meant to be playful. "Careful, babe, don't crush me." The words hit harder than he realized. Clarissa stiffened in his arms. This was supposed to be different. She pulled back, but Daniel, already tipsy from whiskey, just laughed and spun her around again. At the head table, her aunt whispered to her mother, "This won't last. He's not built for her world." Her mother shushed her, but the damage was done. Clarissa caught it all. She sat with a fixed smile, cutting her cake carefully, praying no one noticed her hands trembling. The first real fissure appeared when Daniel disappeared outside with his best man. Clarissa followed minutes later and overheard their voices by the parking lot. The best man slapped Daniel on the back, laughing. "Man, you actually went through with it. Didn't think you had it in you." Daniel muttered something Clarissa couldn't quite catch, but the tone, embarrassed, defensive, sent a shiver through her. She backed away before they saw her, her heart pounding. Back inside, Daniel returned to her side, all smiles again, but the mask had slipped. Clarissa noticed every flicker of annoyance. When she leaned in too close for pictures, when she laughed too loud, when her arm brushed his and he stiffened just slightly. She began to wonder if she had trapped him or if he had trapped himself. By the end of the night, when the hall was littered with empty cups and wilting flowers, Clarissa sat alone for a moment, watching her guests leave. The air smelled of sweat and frosting. In the back seat of the limo, silence settled heavy. Daniel scrolled his phone, replying to texts, while Clarissa stared out the window at the blur of streetlights. Every now and then, she caught their reflections in the glass. Him, sharp-jawed and restless. Her, wide-faced and weary. They looked less like newlyweds and more like strangers sharing a ride. When they pulled up to the hotel, photographers snapped their last pictures, flashes exploding against the night. Clarissa forced one final smile, clutching her bouquet like a shield. But inside, doubt gnawed at her. She wanted to believe she was Daniel's bride, not his burden. She wanted to believe love was enough to silence the whispers. Still, as she stepped into the suite and the door clicked shut behind them, Clarissa knew the truth she couldn't admit out loud. The marriage already carried cracks. And on a night meant for celebration, those cracks were widening, ready to split open into something much darker. The suite smelled faintly of roses and champagne, the kind of romance that wedding magazines promised. A heart-shaped arrangement of petals lay across the bedspread. A bottle of chilled wine sat in a silver bucket by the window, and the city lights blinked beyond the curtains. For a brief second, Clarissa allowed herself to believe she was like every other bride, exhausted but giddy, ready to begin her life as someone's wife. Daniel loosened his tie, tossing it carelessly onto a chair. He didn't look at her the way she had imagined all her life a husband would on their wedding night. Instead of awe, there was a hint of weariness, maybe even irritation. Clarissa busied herself with the bouquet, laying it gently on the dresser, trying to mask the sudden nerves bubbling in her chest. Finally, Daniel muttered, pouring himself a glass of wine and draining it in one swallow. Longest damn day of my life. The words stung, though he hadn't meant them cruelly. Clarissa managed a soft laugh, telling herself he was only tired. She slipped off her heels, the relief immediate, and smoothed down the satin of her gown. In her mind, she pictured what would happen next. Gentle touches, whispered promises, maybe even tears of joy. She wanted their first night together to erase every scar of ridicule she had carried. But Daniel was restless. He fiddled with his cufflinks, scrolled through his phone, sighed heavily as though the evening was an obligation rather than a gift. Clarissa watched him from the edge of the bed, her heart sinking. When he finally crossed the room and kissed her, it was hurried, perfunctory. His hands lingered, but not with tenderness. He tugged at her gown, his breath smelling of whiskey. Clarissa tried to meet his eagerness, but her body was stiff, uncertain. She whispered, "Slow down," hoping to draw him into something softer, but he only laughed. The gown slid away, leaving her in layers of fabric she'd chosen carefully, lace that promised beauty, not shame. Yet under Daniel's gaze, she felt stripped bare, exposed. His smile was crooked, almost mocking. "Never thought I'd be under all this," he said, pressing a palm against her hip. His tone was playful, but the words landed like a slap. Clarissa froze. All her life she had braced for moments like this, when a man's patience snapped, when his voice revealed what his eyes had always concealed. She forced a laugh. "You married me, didn't you?" Daniel smirked. "Yeah, guess I didn't think it all the way through." The silence after hung heavy. Clarissa's chest ached, her breath shallow. In that instant, the humiliation of years returned. Boys mooing in hallways, women whispering in church pews, cousins muttering jokes at family reunions. She had thought marriage would erase it all. Instead, the wound was ripped open, rawer than ever. Her eyes blurred with tears, but Daniel was already tugging her toward the bed. She obeyed because wasn't this what a wife was supposed to do? She lay back against the pillows, her body trembling as he climbed beside her. The weight of her frame pressed into the mattress, springs creaking. Daniel chuckled under his breath. The act itself was clumsy, awkward, heavy with unspoken tension. Daniel grunted, shifted, muttered complaints that weren't even words. Clarissa tried to silence the voice screaming inside her. "You're too big. You're disgusting. You'll never be enough." Then came the breaking point. With a strained laugh, Daniel whispered in her ear, "I can't breathe under all this." The words cracked something inside her. She stiffened, her breath catching, rage and sorrow flooding her chest. He was laughing, but she wasn't. She thought of every moment she had swallowed humiliation, every time she had told herself love would fix it. Her weight shifted. Daniel's laugh faltered. He gasped, his hands pressing against her shoulders. "Hey, Clarissa, wait." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. She looked down at him, his face reddening, his eyes wide. She wasn't crushing him yet, not really. She could still shift away, roll to the side, laugh it off as clumsiness. But something inside her held still. He struggled, coughing, pushing weakly against her. "Get off, can't." Clarissa's vision blurred. She wasn't looking at Daniel anymore. She was looking at every boy who had jeered, every stranger who had sneered, every family member who had whispered she would die alone. His face melted into theirs, his voice into the chorus of laughter that had haunted her since childhood. Her body pressed heavier. Daniel's arms flailed once, twice, then slowed. His lips turned blue, his chest straining. It happened fast and slow at once. The panic in his eyes, the desperate gasp that never came, the stillness that followed. And then silence. Clarissa blinked. The room swam back into focus. She was still straddling him, her breath ragged, sweat dripping down her temples. Beneath her, Daniel was motionless. His chest no longer rose. His hands, limp at his sides, were pale against the sheets. Reality struck like a hammer. She scrambled off him, shaking his shoulders. "Daniel? Baby? Wake up!" No response. She pressed her ear to his mouth, desperate for breath, for anything. Nothing. Her hands fumbled for her phone. The digits blurred as she dialed 911, her voice breaking as she screamed into the receiver. "My husband. He's not breathing. Please, please hurry." The operator's calm voice instructed her to try chest compressions. Clarissa obeyed, pressing down on his ribcage, counting out loud, sobbing between numbers. But his body remained still, unyielding. By the time paramedics burst through the door, the suite was chaos. Clarissa sobbing, her gown torn, petals scattered across the floor. They pulled her back, tried their own resuscitation, but within minutes, one shook his head. Time of death, 12:47 a.m. The petals on the bed seemed grotesque now, crimson like blood. The champagne bottle sweated in silence. The happiest night of Clarissa's life had become a nightmare, one that would never leave her. And yet, as the paramedics lifted Daniel's body, as police officers began to ask quiet, probing questions, a single thought flickered across Clarissa's mind, horrifying and undeniable. He said he couldn't breathe, and I didn't move. The flashing red and blue lights cut across the hotel's pale brick walls, casting the honeymoon suite in a carnival of tragedy. Guests who were still lingering in the lobby peeked out from behind potted plants, whispering, clutching their phones, already texting the news. Something happened upstairs. The bride's husband, he's dead. Detective Marcus Lane arrived just after 1:30 a.m. He was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and the permanent squint of someone who'd seen too many nights like this. He'd been roused from bed, the dispatcher's voice carrying the kind of urgency that meant more than a routine domestic call. When he entered the suite, the smell of roses and sweat hit him first. Then he saw Clarissa, still in her torn wedding dress, makeup smeared, sitting on the floor against the wall. Her breaths came in shallow gasps. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the styrofoam cup of water an EMT had given her. On the bed lay Daniel Miller, covered now with a white sheet. The paramedics had done what they could, but the bruised lips and pallor told the story. One of them muttered to Lane, "Asphyxiation. No obvious trauma." Lane crouched beside Clarissa. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Detective Lane. I need to ask you a few questions." She shook her head, her voice barely audible. "It was an accident. We were together, and then he stopped breathing. I tried to help. I swear I tried." Her words spilled out, disjointed, trembling. Lane studied her sheer size, the way her body seemed to swallow the space around her. He had heard the whispers already from the EMTs in the hall. She smothered him, sat on him, crushed him. It sounded grotesque, almost like a bad joke, but the corpse on the bed was no joke. The first step was the scene itself. Lane noticed the scattered rose petals, the overturned champagne flute, the sheets twisted into knots. Nothing suggested a struggle. No defensive wounds on Daniel's arms. No broken furniture. But there was tension in the air, an invisible residue of something more than intimacy gone wrong. Down in the lobby, the coroner prepared to transport the body. Lane ordered photographs, measurements, every detail cataloged. He spoke to the hotel staff. One clerk admitted hearing shouting around midnight, but assumed it was just newlyweds being rowdy. Another mentioned that guests on the same floor had called to complain of thumping noises and a woman's raised voice. Back in the suite, Clarissa was calmer now, though her eyes darted from corner to corner like a trapped animal. Lane asked her to walk him through the evening. She described the wine, the laughter, how Daniel had teased her. She faltered at that point, tears sliding down her cheeks. He said he couldn't breathe, and then he just stopped. Lane pressed gently. "Did you move off him when he said that?" Her silence stretched long enough to make the air heavy. I didn't realize it was serious," she whispered. "I thought he was joking. He always jokes." The coroner's preliminary report arrived within hours. Cause of death, likely positional asphyxia. No signs of strangulation, no broken bones, no blunt force trauma. Just a man who had suffocated under pressure. On paper, it read like a tragic accident. One forensic expert explained to Lane that suffocation could leave almost no external marks. A man could die simply from the angle of weight pressing against his chest and airway, without bruises or broken bones to prove it. Still, Lane's instincts nagged at him. He had handled his share of domestic cases, and he knew when a story was too clean. He asked Clarissa again if there had been an argument. She denied it, but the neighbors' complaints, the clerk's testimony, all hinted otherwise. By sunrise, the press had already gotten wind. Headlines blared, 400-pound bride crushes husband on wedding night. Photographers camped outside the hotel, their lenses hungry. For every EMT, every cop, every neighbor, the narrative was irresistible. At the police station later that day, Clarissa gave a formal statement. Her lawyer, hastily retained by her mother, sat beside her. She repeated her story. No argument, no intent, just a tragic accident. She described trying CPR, dialing 911, begging Daniel to wake up. She wept so hard the stenographer paused to hand her tissues. But whispers were growing louder. Lane's team interviewed Daniel's friends, and a pattern emerged. One recalled Clarissa saying once at a barbecue, half joking, "If he ever disrespects me, I'll sit on him till he shuts up." Another admitted Daniel had confided doubts about the marriage, worries that he had rushed in too fast. The picture forming wasn't of a simple accident. It was of tension simmering beneath the surface. The evidence, however, was slippery. Without bruises, without physical signs of a struggle, intent was almost impossible to prove. Lane knew a prosecutor would hesitate. The law demanded certainty. Suspicion wasn't enough. As Clarissa was released back home, cameras followed her every step. Neighbors stared, whispered, crossed the street when she walked past. To some, she was a grieving widow. To others, she was a killer hiding behind her size. For Lane, the case was already gnawing at the edges of his mind. He had seen justice twist under the weight of perception before. Was Clarissa a woman crushed by a lifetime of ridicule who had finally snapped? Or just a broken-hearted bride whose wedding night turned into a nightmare? The truth, for now, lay buried with Daniel Miller. By the time Daniel Miller was laid to rest, the story had already stopped belonging to his family and started belonging to the public. Jackson was a small city, but news spread like wildfire, and this story had all the makings of a national headline. A wedding, a sudden death, and a bride whose body alone seemed to make her both suspect and spectacle. At the funeral, mourners whispered louder than the preacher spoke. Daniel's mother sat rigid in the front pew, her eyes fixed on the casket, but her sister muttered just loud enough for Clarissa to hear. She killed him. Sat right on him and killed him. Clarissa kept her gaze down, clutching a tissue, tears rolling silently. She wanted to stand up and scream that she hadn't meant for any of it to happen. But the weight of all those eyes kept her in place, pinned down more surely than chains ever could. The couple down the street swore they had heard yelling at the hotel, the bride's voice sharp with fury. A co-worker of Daniel's claimed he had confided doubts about the marriage, saying, "She's intense. If I ever cross her, she'll make me regret it." Whether or not he ever said it didn't matter. People repeated it as truth. Even Clarissa's friends couldn't decide what to believe. One recalled a night at a bar when Clarissa, drunk and bitter, joked, "If a man ever disrespects me, I'll put him under and he won't get up." It had been said with a laugh, dismissed at the time as gallows humor. Now it echoed like a confession. The tabloids fanned the flames. One headline screamed, "Bride turned body into murder weapon." Another ran a grainy picture of Clarissa at the funeral with the caption, "Killer or widow?" Talk shows debated her case like sport. Some commentators painted her as a predator, a woman who used her size deliberately. Others defended her as a victim of fat shaming, arguing the public's obsession with her weight had turned a tragic accident into a witch hunt. In Jackson, the gossip was merciless. At the grocery store, women nudged each other in the produce aisle, whispering, "That's her, the one who crushed him." Children snickered openly. Clarissa stopped going out at all, sending her mother to run errands. The four walls of her small apartment became both refuge and prison. Detective Lane felt the pressure, too. Calls poured into the station from people demanding an arrest. Others insisted the police were bullying an innocent woman. One anonymous tipster even suggested the death was staged, part of a bizarre insurance scam. The more he dug, the less clarity he found. The problem was the evidence, or the lack of it. The coroner's report was frustratingly plain. Asphyxiation, no signs of struggle, no bruising that proved force beyond the weight of her body. It was entirely possible Daniel had laughed, teased, and in seconds his airway was blocked. Possible, and infuriatingly difficult to prove otherwise. Still, suspicion clung to Clarissa like a shadow. Each rumor added a brick to the wall of guilt around her. Even Daniel's closest friends were split. One, choking back tears, told reporters he didn't deserve to die like that. She knew what she was doing. Another shrugged, helplessly. Maybe it was just a bad joke gone wrong. He liked to push buttons. Maybe this time he pushed too far. The divide cut through the whole community. To some, Clarissa was a monster hiding behind tears. To others, she was another casualty of a cruel world, condemned for her size long before she ever said, "I do." She asked herself the same question the town whispered. Did she pause? Did she choose, even for a second, not to move? Or had it all happened too fast for choice at all? She knew the law couldn't read her heart, but she also knew the jury of public opinion already had. And no verdict in court would ever silence the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. The courthouse in downtown Jackson had seen its share of drama, but nothing quite like this. Reporters lined the stone steps before sunrise, their cameras trained on the double doors where Clarissa James, now known across the country as the 400-pound bride, would appear. Inside, the air was charged, the hushed buzz of gossip mixing with the faint hum of ceiling fans. The question that had divided the town for months was now placed squarely in the hands of the court. Was Daniel Miller's death a tragic accident, or had his bride turned her body into a weapon? Clarissa entered flanked by her attorney, her mother trailing behind. She wore a simple navy dress, loose enough to hide her frame as best it could, though there was no hiding her presence. The cameras clicked in rapid fire. Some journalists barked questions. Did you sit on him on purpose? Do you feel guilty, Clarissa? She kept her head down, lips pressed tight, as if each word thrown at her was another stone. The prosecution laid their case with quiet confidence. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kincaid, a woman known for her sharp questioning, stood before the jury and painted Clarissa as a woman who had carried years of rage and shame, who had reached a breaking point on her wedding night. She told friends more than once, Kincaid declared, pacing slowly, that her husband would learn to respect her by any means necessary. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Miller never got that chance. She introduced testimony from hotel staff who claimed they heard raised voices in the suite, a woman's voice sharp and angry. She called neighbors who repeated stories of Clarissa's so-called jokes about sitting on a man until he shut up. Even Daniel's best friend took the stand, his voice trembling as he recalled a conversation weeks before the wedding. He told me he wasn't sure, that he felt trapped, that she scared him sometimes. The words landed heavy in the courtroom, rippling across the jury box. But the defense was equally prepared. Clarissa's attorney, Leonard Graves, knew he couldn't erase the suspicion, so he leaned into the humanity. He painted Clarissa as a woman mocked since childhood, a woman who had finally found love only to have it ripped away in the cruelest twist of fate. This is not murder, Graves told the jury, his hand resting lightly on Clarissa's shoulder. This is an accident, a tragic accident that could have happened to any couple, regardless of size. Are we truly here to put this woman on trial for her body? He called medical experts to explain positional asphyxia, the way certain body positions can cut off airflow unintentionally, especially if alcohol is involved. He reminded the jury that Daniel's body bore no signs of violent struggle, no bruises consistent with an attack. If she wanted him dead, Graves said, leaning closer, there would be clearer evidence. But there is none. None. The cross-examinations were brutal. When the prosecution asked Clarissa why she hadn't moved the second Daniel said he couldn't breathe, she broke down on the stand. "I thought he was joking," she cried, voice cracking. "He always joked. I didn't know until it was too late." Her sobs echoed in the courtroom, and jurors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others watched closely, weighing whether the tears were genuine or rehearsed. Outside the courthouse, the media circus grew louder. Protesters carried signs, "Justice for Daniel," alongside "Stop Fat-Shaming Clarissa." Opinion pieces flooded national papers. Some argued Clarissa was a victim of cruel stereotypes, her grief twisted into a punchline. Others insisted her size was her weapon and Daniel her casualty. The trial had become more than a case. It was a referendum on weight, gender, and justice itself. Back inside, the trial reached its climax with closing arguments. Prosecutor Kincaid thundered, "A man is dead. Do not be distracted by sympathy. Do not let her tears blind you." Clarissa James knew her size. She knew her power, and she chose to use it. Her fingers stabbed the air toward the jury. This was not love. This was control, and it killed Daniel Miller. Graves countered with calm precision. The law is not about whispers. It is not about what people think they heard at a hotel or what a neighbor says was a joke years ago. The law requires proof, and proof is what the state does not have. This was not malice. This was tragedy. When the gavel finally struck to dismiss the court for deliberation, the room exhaled as one. Clarissa sagged into her chair, her hands clasped tight, knuckles white. Her mother whispered prayers under her breath. In the gallery, Daniel's family glared with a mixture of grief and fury, as though willing the jury to see what they believed was obvious. The jury filed out, leaving behind an echo of silence. The town, the families, and Clarissa herself now had nothing to do but wait. And as she sat in that silent courtroom, tears drying on her cheeks, Clarissa realized something chilling. Even if the jury set her free, she would never be free. Not from the whispers, not from the stares, not from the haunting memory of Daniel's last words. The verdict was read in a courtroom so silent that even the hum of the air conditioner seemed deafening. Not guilty. The words echoed through the chamber, a thunderclap that split the room in two. On one side, Clarissa's mother wept with relief, clutching her daughter's hand. On the other, Daniel's family erupted in disbelief, his mother wailing, his brother shouting that the system had failed. The bailiff had to step forward, stern and steady, to keep order as the judge's gavel banged for silence. For Clarissa, the words were both salvation and sentence. The law had freed her, but the world would not. The cameras outside captured her leaving the courthouse, her navy dress clinging in the Mississippi heat, reporters firing questions she couldn't answer. "Do you feel responsible? Was it an accident? Or did you mean to do it?" She kept her head down, shielded by her attorney's arm, but the noise followed her down the courthouse steps, through the parking lot, and into the rest of her life. In the weeks that followed, she tried to disappear. The blinds in her apartment stayed shut. Groceries were delivered by her mother. Every time she dared to step outside, whispers chased her like shadows. At the gas station, "That's her, the one who crushed her husband." At the pharmacy, "How's she not in prison?" Even children, too young to understand, repeated what they'd overheard at home. "Don't sit too close, or she'll smother you." Daniel's family fought back in the only way they could, through the court of public opinion. His mother gave interviews, her grief sharpened into fury. "My son didn't die by accident," she told one reporter, her voice breaking. "That woman killed him, and the law let her walk free." Donations poured in to fund memorial scholarships in Daniel's name, but every ceremony carried the same undercurrent, a reminder that justice, in their eyes, had not been served. Meanwhile, Clarissa's name lingered in court records and gossip columns, impossible to erase. Strangers dissected her body, her marriage, her soul, as though tragedy itself had made her public property. And yet, not everyone condemned her. Advocacy groups for body positivity rallied to her defense. Writers penned op-eds about the dangers of fat shaming, arguing that Clarissa had become a scapegoat, that society's obsession with her weight had turned tragedy into spectacle. If she had been thin, one columnist wrote, this case would never have gone to trial. Others pointed out the double standard, that Daniel's teasing, his cruel jokes, had been erased from the narrative, leaving only Clarissa as villain. But those voices were drowned in the louder chorus of blame. At church, where she once sat in the back pew, she now faced pews that emptied when she entered. Former friends avoided her calls. Even family, worn down by the constant stares, urged her to move away, start over in a new city. But where could she go? The internet had made her infamous. Her name, her face, her size, they were permanent markers. Alone at night, she replayed that moment again and again. His fading laughter and her hesitation, the heartbeat where she hadn't moved. She told herself it had been too quick, too confusing, but doubt gnawed at her. Had something inside her wanted him to feel, even for 1 second, the crushing weight she had carried her whole life? The law had absolved her, but conscience was another matter. In the mirror, she no longer saw a bride or even a widow. She saw a woman trapped between pity and suspicion, between innocence and guilt. At the barber shop, at church picnics, at family reunions, people still lowered their voices to retell the story of the bride who crushed her husband on their wedding night. Some swore it was an accident. Others insisted it was murder. The truth lay buried with Daniel Miller, leaving Clarissa to live the rest of her life under a sentence no court could overturn, the lifelong weight of suspicion. And as she walked through town, head down, steps heavy, Clarissa knew that though she had been declared not guilty, she would never truly be free. Years passed, but the story never really died. In Jackson, it became a kind of whispered folktale, told in barbershops and back porches, at Sunday dinners when conversation turned to tragedy. The younger generation, too young to remember the trial, grew up hearing it secondhand. You know about the bride who crushed her husband to death, don't you? Each retelling bent the truth a little further, turning Clarissa James into myth, half monster, half martyr. For Clarissa herself, the years blurred together in a quiet exile. She moved apartments twice, changed jobs, even tried living for a short time in Memphis, but the whispers followed her. Strangers recognized her in grocery stores, at bus stops, in church pews. The internet made forgetting impossible. Type her name into a search bar, and up came the same headlines, the same mocking photos, the same cruel jokes. She carried them like a scar she couldn't hide. Some saw her as a warning, others as a symbol. Advocates for body acceptance spoke of her case in lectures and essays, pointing out how quickly society had turned her body into a crime scene. They asked why her weight was treated as intent, why her grief was dismissed as performance. For them, Clarissa became a cautionary tale not about violence, but about prejudice. Yet in the same breath, critics used her as proof of danger, muttering that some bodies just aren't meant to be trusted. Clarissa rarely spoke publicly. Once, years after the trial, she agreed to a brief television interview. Sitting under the harsh studio lights, she looked smaller somehow, diminished, her voice soft as she said, "I loved Daniel. I didn't mean to hurt him. But no matter what the court decided, people will always believe what they want to believe." It was the only time she addressed the world directly. After that, she disappeared again, choosing silence over scrutiny. Daniel's grave, meanwhile, became a strange kind of pilgrimage site. Some left flowers, others left notes demanding justice, as if the jury's verdict could be overturned by paper and ink. His family kept his memory alive, hosting fundraisers in his name, each event a subtle reminder of the wound they believed had never healed. And so the community remained divided. To one half, Clarissa was a widow punished twice, once by fate, once by society. To the other, she was a killer who had slipped through the cracks of justice. Both sides agreed on only one thing. The truth of what happened in that hotel suite could never be fully known. Clarissa lived with that truth every day. Each morning when she faced the mirror, she saw not just her reflection, But the night replayed again. Daniel's laugh, his words, his fading breath. The verdict had freed her body, but her soul remained shackled. In the end, the legacy of the case was bigger than either of them. It was a story about shame, about the cruelty of perception, about how a single night can brand a person forever. In Jackson, people still lowered their voices when her name came up, glancing around as if speaking of her might summon something heavy, something unspeakable. Clarissa James remained alive, but in many ways, she had been buried alongside Daniel. Both of them ghosts of a wedding night that would never be forgotten. Detective Marcus Lane, long since retired, still kept a file of the case in his drawer. Of all the deaths he'd investigated, this was the one that lingered. The case with no clear villain, no clear victim, only shadows that never faded.